If you agree that sometimes the most dangerous people in the world are the ones who look like they don't belong in danger at all, like and subscribe. Because this one isn't fiction. This one is proof that the scariest operatives aren't the ones in shiny PR uniforms. They're the ones you walk past in a normal neighborhood and dismiss instantly. She looked like fence paint. She looked like stain samples and low Saturday aisles. She looked like the oddly quiet, late 20s woman that moved silently, worked silently, collected cash silently, and made everyone assume she just preferred simple, the lowest stakes life possible. But let me give you a teaser that sets up how insane this gets. The neighbors didn't know her real name. They didn't know she was 28, not 35 like Facebook thought. They didn't know she had been pulled out of universities through a pipeline program that never existed on any recruiting site. And they didn't know the moment they took her for granted. They were staring at something that once toppled entire classified networks overseas. She wasn't painting fences because she loved the aesthetic. She was painting fences because it was the only place she could disappear without alerting Signal's intelligence that she'd gone dark voluntarily. Her cover wasn't Suburban. Suburban was her shield. She never hung out with neighbors. She never went drinking. She never bonded. She never gave them a backstory long enough for anyone to trace. Move from out west was the maximum she ever gave a single human being on that street. What they didn't know was out west actually meant Utah desert training compounds that technically don't officially exist in any FOIA packet. What they didn't know was that she lived without digital footprint, not because she was quirky, but because she was dormant. Dormant is different than retired. Dormant is different than gone. Dormant is when an asset gets shelved because the world thinks the threat vector went to sleep. Dormant is when you wait. And she waited. She waited by painting fences. Something that looked so quiet, so peaceful, so nice, while whole foreign intelligence blocks were praying she stayed disappeared forever. She didn't look like a soldier. Because she wasn't one. She wasn't infantry. She wasn't grunt warfare. She wasn't a uniformed warfighter. She was the kind they called in when the uniformed warfighters had no map left to follow. She was built for invisibility. She was built to slip through human terrain across oceans without ever triggering radar, without ever hitting suspicion, without ever leaving aftermath fingerprints. But this is what still gets people frozen when they realize this is actually how modern covert warfare looks now. She was 28. That age is newer world warfare. That age is when the intelligence world is starting to shift recruiting away from those who already look hardened, and instead they build ghosts who look like your next-door dog sitter. And she was one of the best that pipeline ever created. Part 1 begins the day everything broke. Black Tahoe stops at the mouth of that cul-de-sac. She doesn't hear it because she has AirPods in. Everyone else hears it. Everyone else sees it. Door opens. A man steps out. No badges. No insignias. Just posture. And that posture alone was enough for her nervous system to recognize long before her retina did. Her brush stopped mid-stroke against a cedar plank. She froze like her heart recognized a sound the conscious brain didn't decode yet. And the neighbors watching from windows didn't understand why the air suddenly thickened. The chief walked toward her and didn't break eye contact once. Not with anyone else. Not with any neighbor. He locked onto her. And he said one single sentence that detonated every illusion on that suburban block like a frag grenade thrown under a dinner table. Report to HQ, Cobra. Paintbrush falls from her hand. It splatters white across the grass like snowfall that shouldn't exist in that season. Everyone's throat dries at once. They don't know what Cobra means, but the way she reacted tells them instantly that it means something bigger than anything they've ever been in the room with. And this is where everything turns. Because for the first time since she arrived here, she breaks cover posture. She stands full spine straight, not slouched, not small, full controlled presence like she just put back on a skin she thought she would never have to wear again. The neighbors see a new person, not the quiet girl they paid $200 to stain backyard rails. They see someone calculating, someone with focus that isn't normal, someone who has rehearsed death proximity more times than they've rehearsed grocery lists. She answers him quietly. Understood, Chief. And that's the moment the suburban illusion dies permanently. Somewhere in the world, some threat that once feared her resurfaced. Somewhere, something that was supposed to stay buried woke back up. And the chief didn't come here to visit. He came here because the clock just restarted. And this was her extraction moment. She didn't pack. She didn't call anyone. She didn't leave notes. She just set the brush down permanently and walked toward that Tahoe as if this was the real life she lived, and the fences were the dream. Neighbors realized she wasn't meant to stay here. She was meant to be recalled. When Cobra stepped inside that mill HQ, it wasn't nostalgia. Nostalgia requires sentiment. Cobra didn't operate sentiment. She operated signal. She operated pattern. She operated threat geometry. The interior of this underground facility didn't trigger memory because memory is emotional, and emotional recall wastes milliseconds. What it triggered was system states. Dormant modules in her brain began reinitializing in sequential order the moment her boots crossed that threshold. Civilians think people like her remember how to be dangerous. Incorrect. The danger never leaves. It simply gets shelved. And that day, those shelves opened. She wasn't escorted like a guest. She was redirected like a weapon being remounted into a platform. There's a difference. 5 floors down, the heavy door with no badge reader and no biometric panel. Because this space predates both. It predates the era where digital trust was even considered trustworthy. In this sub-basement, nothing wireless can transmit. Every wall in this section has Faraday layering baked into the structure. When she crossed that point, she returned to the original form of her existence, analog sovereign operator. The chief didn't greet her with pleasantries or humanizing softness. Cobra didn't require it. Assets this tier don't require comfort. They require clarity. He placed a folder, physical, on the metal table. Manila, sealed with wax. The kind that doesn't exist anymore, because the only reason to use wax is when the chain of custody has to be provable by physical damage, not metadata. She sliced the seal clean. First page, name. Second page, home port. Third page, photo. The man in the photo was not an assassin, not a handler, not a courier. He was a node. The pivot node. Pivot nodes are the most dangerous because they don't look threatening. They look normal. They look like the kind the world never fears. Pivot nodes are financial arteries disguised as irrelevant hobbyists. Pivot nodes tie offshore liquidity channels to dormant extremist infrastructure silently. Pivot nodes don't recruit soldiers. They fund the soldiers. Cobra scanned him. Civilians see sunglasses, marina, fishing boat. Cobra sees microtells. The angle of his wrist. The tendon tension in the left jaw, the exact degree of his left foot pivot against the boat deck. That tilt means he's holding micro-weight distribution for fast escape pivot, which only happens when someone expects extraction or contact. Civilians don't hold that tension casually. Cobra didn't ask the chief who captured this image. She didn't need to. She could tell by pixel artifact distribution and light source direction that this image was taken from a covert position across water. Likely a floating drone disguised as drift debris. Distortion in the left edge suggests slight lens oil smudge from manual reposition, which means the team in the field was close. Too close if this node was active. Whoever shot this had courage or desperation. Chief waited until she processed. They rebuilt the cell, he said. This was not exaggeration. This was not speculation. This was not theory. This was threat confirmation. The cell she annihilated abroad at 22. The cell that should have been permanently suffocated was being resurrected domestically. That is the worst-case scenario in classified counter-operations. External terror architecture migrating to home soil means irreversibility potential. Cobra didn't blink. She simply asked quietly, "Leak?" Chief nodded once. "Leak. Inside operators know. External threat regrowth only occurs if internal stability is compromised. Internal stability is more fragile than the public believes. It takes one person, one defector, one asset handler turned traitor to reopen dead networks. And the moment Cobra processed that, her dormant operational matrix fully activated. Because people like her aren't trained to chase. They are trained to erase. And erasing internal betrayal requires strategic ruthlessness, not brute violence. The world thinks covert warfare is guns and blood. The real battlefield is trust. The most lethal battlefield is breach of trust. She closed the folder and pushed it back. Her voice was engineered to neutrality. Who else knows I'm active? Chief, only this floor. Neutrality confirmed internal threat vector. If more than 6 personnel units knew she was returned, leak probability would compound exponentially. Cobra internal procedural prioritized 3 branches simultaneously. Identify leak inside the infrastructure. Identify pivot node's next geographic movement. Identify funding inflow vector, not destination. People think counterterror is about stopping the event. Wrong. The key is stopping the capital. All war, physical or ideological, runs on money first. If you stop the artery, the muscle never flexes. That single thought stream took her 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, the analysts watching her process felt fear. Because they realized this woman, who was quietly painting fences 45 minutes prior, was now calculating threat arcs that would take entire national task forces days to simulate. Cobra looked back up at the chief. Slow. Deliberate. When do I go? Chief, tonight. Coastal. East Corridor. He departs in 36 hours. If he connects to the offshore handoff node before you intercept, architecture becomes distributed. Once distributed, we can't unthread it. We lose control. Cobra stood. She had no duffel to pack. Dormant assets don't store personal attachment items. She did not require a weapon locker. She didn't need a briefing packet. Her entire threat map lived inside her. Her final internal procedural query was introspective, not operational. She needed to determine if 6 years of dormancy had degraded her instinct half-life. Dormant assets fear one thing more than mortality: loss of surgical instinct. But when she felt the certainty inside her spine, she knew her instinct was not dead, just archived. She walked toward the lift. Analysts watched the way she moved. Movement is a language. Movement is data. Cobra walked not with haste, but with inevitability. Outside, night would fall. Inside, operations already began. As she exited the basement threshold, the chief spoke without turning. You still remember how to disappear? Her reply wasn't dramatic. Disappearing is not a skill you forget. It is a species you become. She didn't turn around. She just answered. I never stopped. Cobra did not go home first. She didn't need to. Dormant assets don't do sentimental closure. She left HQ and moved directly toward coastline transit. The rest of the world above ground had no idea the next 48 hours would determine whether a threat architecture went global again or died quietly without a single headline. That's the irony of modern war. The wars the public celebrates, comments on, argues about, are almost never the wars that actually mattered. The real wars are the ones that never get to start. Cobra specialized in making sure wars never got born. Coastal infiltration was simple. Silent port. No cameras. The pivot node was scheduled for an offshore night departure, disguised as pre-dawn fishing, like a million harmless coastal men in America. This is why pivot nodes are dangerous. They look identical to harmless archetypes. If this were the old version of terror infrastructure, Cobra would have had to chase bomb makers, weapons runners, field recruiters. Not anymore. This generation of asymmetric threat doesn't use traditional operatives first. They use bankers, traders, silent mobility finance. The killers don't show up until the liquidity pipeline is already locked. Cobra watched him move to his boat. He didn't know she was back. That was the advantage. Dormant assets become urban myths. Everyone assumes they burned. Everyone assumes they faded. Everyone assumes they died quietly under some obscure cover condition far away from home. The pivot node had no reason to imagine that the asset who killed his chain overseas would ever resurface in his domestic shadow pocket. She boarded without sound. The boat drifted slowly away. When he finally realized he wasn't alone, it wasn't because she made noise. It was because his nervous system detected predator presence before conscious cognition caught up. Humans used to be prey. The body remembers predator. He turned. She didn't aim a gun. She didn't raise a blade. She didn't need to. What she needed was information. Because she knew if she neutralized him without the leak identity, it would only delay the architecture. The real enemy was inside the system, not on this boat. This is where civilians fundamentally misunderstand real intelligence work. Winning isn't killing the pawn. Winning is mapping the hierarchy behind the pawn so you can remove it root up instead of branch down. He resisted at first. They all do. But pivot nodes never have operational durability. They survive by secrecy, not backbone. Under the right pressure vector, they always unravel. And when he broke fast. Faster than she predicted. Faster than the chief predicted. And the words he choked out shifted the entire axis of this operation. He wasn't the one rebuilding the cell. He was the receiver. Someone inside had already done the rebuild. His job was simply to activate and move the funds into the last shell account chain to finalize operational resurrection. He told her the leak name, and it was one of theirs. It was not a marginal contractor, not a discarded analyst, not a disillusioned asset handler. It was a person with badge-level access to dormant clearance tier infrastructure. Someone who could access old shadow routes with no audit trail. Someone who could mask their resurrection through legacy dead channels. When Cobra got the name, the boat drifted silent under black water like time had paused. She disabled the boat quietly, called in covert retrieval. No sirens, no maritime law enforcement, no public incident. One quiet removal. One quiet erasure of a link that would have detonated the world 6 months from now if left unchecked. She returned inland before dawn. The chief was waiting. She gave him the name. He closed his eyes once, because he recognized the magnitude, then reopened them like someone who decided to survive the next 5 years. Cobra did not flinch. Dormant was gone. Permanently. There are assets that go back to sleep. Cobra is not one of them. War wasn't starting. War had already started quietly. And the moment she returned, the balance sheet of danger shifted back to her side. Because some threats require militaries. But some threats only require one woman with perfect instinct, perfect silence, and no fear of being invisible forever. The fences were never her real life. This is who she always was.